The Reading courthouse stood like a weathered sentinel at the edge of town, its brick facade softened by decades of California sun and winter rain. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the wooden benches and scuffed linoleum floor. It was a place of procedure, of judgments handed down in clipped tones where the lives of the guilty and the desperate were weighed on scales that often felt unbalanced. On this late winter morning, with the chill of February still clinging to the air, the courtroom was half empty, a scattering of locals and court staff murmuring softly as they awaited the day's cases. Sam Reynolds, shuffled through the side door, his wrists bound by cold steel cuffs, his head bowed under the weight of 67 years. His army jacket, frayed at the cuffs and too large for his gaunt frame, hung like a shroud over his shoulders. The lines on his face, etched deep by time, war, and loss, told a story no one in the room bothered to read. Once, he'd worn the crisp green of a sergeant's uniform, a silver star pinned proudly to his chest. Now, he stood in second-hand clothes from a shelter, waiting to be judged for crimes that barely registered in the grand scheme of his life. "State your name," the clerk said, her voice flat, routine. Sam cleared his throat, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "Samuel Reynolds, Sergeant, United States Army." The words carried a quiet pride, a flicker of the man he'd been, but they went unnoticed by the sparse crowd. A few locals shifted in their seats, their faces a mix of boredom and pity. To them, Sam was just the old man who lingered behind the Starlight Diner, a fixture as familiar as the cracked sidewalks, but no more significant. No one could have guessed what was about to unfold. Judge Clara Bennett sat at the bench, her dark robe a stark contrast to the pale wood around her. At 50, she was a figure of quiet authority, her sharp hazel eyes and composed demeanor earning her respect in Reading's legal circles. Her reputation for fairness was tempered by a private grief, one she carried like a stone in her chest. The loss of her older sister, Captain Laura Bennett, killed in Vietnam in 1971. Clara's hands moved with practiced precision as she opened Sam's case file, but her fingers paused, her breath catching as she read the name. Samuel Reynolds, Sergeant, U.S. Army, Vietnam, 1968 to 1972. The name struck a chord, faint but insistent, like a half-remembered song. Clara's mind flashed to the letters Laura had sent from the Mekong Delta, yellowed pages she kept in a locked drawer at home. Laura had written of a Sergeant Reynolds, a man who'd saved her unit during a brutal ambush, carrying wounded soldiers to safety under a hail of gunfire. Could this be the same man? Clara's skin prickled, her pulse quickening, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. She was a judge, bound by impartiality, yet the possibility gnawed at her. Case 23C, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. City of Reading versus Samuel Reynolds. Charges: loitering, public disturbance, resisting. Arrest. Sam rose slowly, his joints protesting with each movement. His gray hair, thinning and uncombed, caught the light, and his eyes, a faded blue, stayed fixed on the floor. He was a man worn down by time, by untreated injuries from 2 tours in Vietnam, by the slow erosion of a life that had once held promise. He stood alone, no lawyer at his side. His public defender had been called away to another courtroom, leaving him to face the charges unrepresented. Prosecutor Michael Torres stepped forward, a young man in a crisp suit, his dark hair neatly parted, his voice polished and rehearsed. At 32, he was ambitious, eager to climb the ranks of Reading's district attorney's office, and Sam's case was just another step on that ladder. "Your Honor," Torres began, addressing Clara. "Mr. Reynolds has been cited multiple times for loitering behind the Starlight Diner on Main Street. The owner, Mr. James Cole, filed 3 complaints this month alone, citing disturbances to customers. On February 15th, at approximately 10:30 p.m., officers found Mr. Reynolds in the alley, refusing to vacate when ordered. He resisted arrest, necessitating physical restraint." Clara's eyes flicked to Sam, noting the slight tremble in his hands, the way his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. "Mr. Torres," she said, her voice even but probing, "can you clarify the nature of the disturbance?" Torres hesitated, flipping through his notes. The complaints state that Mr. Reynolds's presence made customers uncomfortable. He was seen rummaging through trash bins and sitting near the diner's heating vent, which obstructed access to the alley. Clara's brow furrowed slightly. Rummaging or sitting? Which is it? Torres cleared his throat, sensing her scrutiny. Both, Your Honor. The reports mention both activities, though primarily sitting near the vent during cold weather. Clara nodded, her gaze returning to Sam. Mr. Reynolds, do you have legal representation today? Sam shook his head, his voice barely audible. No, ma'am. My lawyer. He got called away. Would you like to speak on your own behalf? She asked, leaning forward slightly, her tone softer than protocol demanded. Sam hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides. He straightened, just a fraction, as if summoning a long-buried instinct. No excuses, ma'am, he said, his voice rough but clear. I was just trying to stay warm. Jimmy, Mr. Cole, he leaves food sometimes. Known him since we were young. His brother served with me in Nam. The mention of Jimmy Cole in Vietnam sent a ripple through Clara's thoughts. Laura's letters had described a tight-knit unit, men who'd become brothers under fire. Could Jimmy's connection to Sam confirm her suspicion? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the case. Why that location, Mr. Reynolds? She asked, her tone edged with curiosity. Sam's eyes met hers briefly, then dropped again. The vent's warm, ma'am. Winter gets cold and the shelter's full most nights. Jimmy's Diner. It's a place I know. Clara made a note, her pen moving swiftly across the page. And your service? She asked, breaking from standard procedure, her voice carrying a weight that puzzled the courtroom. Can you confirm your military record? Sam straightened further, his voice gaining strength. United States Army, ma'am. 1968 to 1972. Sergeant, 1st Infantry Division, Mekong Delta. 2 tours. The words landed heavily, stirring a murmur in the gallery. A few locals exchanged glances, surprised to hear the old man they'd dismissed as a vagrant speak of service with such clarity. Clara's hand paused over the file, her heart racing. She needed to know more, but decorum demanded restraint. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, she said, her voice steady despite the storm within. The court will proceed. Torres resumed, his tone more measured now, as if sensing the shift in the room. Your Honor, this is Mr. Reynolds' 3rd citation this year. We recommend a $500 fine and a no trespass order for the downtown area, including Main Street, to prevent further incidents. Clara's lips tightened. A no trespass order would bar Sam from the 4th Street shelter, the only place he could reliably find a bed, and from the church meals that kept him fed. It would leave him exposed to Redding's bitter winter, with nowhere to turn. She glanced at Sam, his face impassive but his eyes betraying a quiet resignation. She knew that look. Her sister had described it in her letters, the stoicism of soldiers who'd seen too much to expect mercy. Before she could respond, the courtroom doors swung open, and a woman strode in, her heels clicking against the floor. Elena Vasquez, a public defender in her late 30s, carried a worn briefcase and an air of determination. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes, sharp and compassionate, scanned the room. Your Honor, she said, reaching the defense table. Elena Vasquez, representing Mr. Reynolds. I apologize for the delay. I was informed of this case by the Veterans Advocacy Network and request to take it pro bono. Clara's eyebrows rose, but she nodded, masking her relief. This is highly irregular, Ms. Vasquez. The court was not notified of new representation. It was a last-minute development, Your Honor, Elena replied, her voice calm but firm. I respectfully request a brief recess to confer with my client. Clara studied her, then Sam, whose confusion was evident. He hadn't called a lawyer, couldn't afford one, especially not one with Elena's reputation for fighting for the underserved. The court will recess for 15 minutes, Clara said, rising and retreating to her chambers, her mind a whirlwind of questions. In the quiet of her office, Clara pulled off her glasses, her hands unsteady. 20 years on the bench had taught her to compartmentalize, but this case was different. She opened a drawer and withdrew a small wooden box, its surface polished but worn. Inside were Laura's letters, tied with a faded ribbon, and a photograph of the two sisters. Clara, barely 20, standing beside Laura in her Army nurse's uniform, her smile radiant before Vietnam stole it. Clara's fingers traced the gay edges of a letter dated April 1970, the paper brittle with age. "Dear Clara," Laura had written, "we were ambushed today in the Delta. It was chaos, gunfire, screams, the river running red. I thought we were done for, but a sergeant named Reynolds saved us. He carried Private Cole to safety, then went back for others, even after taking shrapnel. 6 men are alive because of him. He's the kind of soldier you'd be proud to know." Clara's throat tightened. Laura had survived that day, thanks to Sam, only to die months later when her convoy hit a mine. The folded flag from her funeral sat in Clara's home, a constant reminder of the sister she'd lost. She'd tried to find Reynolds after Laura's death, hoping to learn more about her final days, but the Army had lost track of him. Discharged with PTSD and injuries, swallowed by a system that failed its own. Now, impossibly, he sat in her courtroom, a stranger to all but her. A knock broke her reverie. Her clerk, a young man named Tim, peered in. "Judge Bennett, the recess is almost over. Anything you need?" Clara closed the box, her resolve hardening. "No, Tim, I'm ready." But she wasn't. Not for what she suspected was coming. Not for the collision of past and present that threatened to unravel her carefully guarded composure. Back in the courtroom, Sam leaned toward Elena, his voice low. "I don't understand. Ma'am, I didn't hire you. I can't pay for this." Elena's smile was warm, her eyes steady. "You don't need to pay, Mr. Reynolds. My firm takes cases like yours, veterans who've been overlooked. We got a tip from a friend at the VA about your service record. I'm here to make sure you're heard." Sam's brow furrowed, but he nodded, too weary to argue. Across the room, Torres adjusted his tie, his confidence unshaken but his curiosity piqued by Elena's arrival. The gallery, now slightly fuller with latecomers, buzzed with quiet speculation. Among them was Jimmy Cole, the Starlight Diner's owner, his weathered face tense as he watched the proceedings. He'd known Sam for years, shared a bond forged in Vietnam, but hadn't expected to see him in court. Clara returned to the bench, her posture flawless, her face a mask of neutrality. "Ms. Vasquez," she said, "has your client made a decision?" Elena rose, her voice clear. "Yes, Your Honor. We request dismissal of all charges." Mr. Reynolds was not loitering or disturbing the peace. He was seeking shelter from dangerous cold, with implied permission from the diner's owner. We also have evidence of his exemplary military service which contextualizes his circumstances. Torres stood, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, while Mr. Reynolds' service is noted, it's irrelevant to the charges. He violated city ordinances and resisted arrest, posing a risk to public safety." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'll determine what's relevant, Mr. Torres. Ms. Vasquez, proceed." Elena nodded, opening her briefcase to retrieve a file. Mr. Reynolds served 2 tours in Vietnam, earning a Silver Star for valor in the Mekong Delta, April 1970. He saved 6 soldiers during an ambush, risking his life under enemy fire. His current situation, homelessness, untreated PTSD, and physical injuries, is a direct result of systemic failures in veteran care. He wasn't causing harm, he was surviving. The courtroom stirred, whispers rippling through the gallery. Clara's hand tightened around her pen, her mind racing. She needed confirmation, needed to know if this was Laura's Reynolds. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Can you describe the incident in the Mekong Delta, April 17, 1970? Sam hesitated, his eyes distant as if the memories were a weight he'd carried too long. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice low but steady. "We were on patrol, 1st Infantry, near the river. Viet Cong hit us hard, mortars, machine guns. Our medic went down, then Private Cole. I couldn't leave them. Got Cole to cover, then went back for the others. Captain Bennett, she was a nurse, helped patch them up under fire. We held the line till choppers came." Clara's breath caught, her sister's name a jolt to her heart. She forced her voice to remain even. Captain Laura Bennett? Sam nodded, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. Brave woman. Kept us alive till we got out. The gallery fell silent, the weight of Sam's words sinking in. Jimmy Cole, sitting near the back, leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes glistening. Clara's composure wavered, but she pressed on. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Ms. Vasquez, do you have further evidence? Elena nodded, her voice firm. We call James Cole, owner of the Starlight Diner, to testify. Jimmy rose, his steps heavy, as he approached the stand. He was in his late 60s, his face weathered like Sam's, his diner apron swapped for a clean shirt. He swore the oath, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I've known Sam since Nam, he began, looking at Sam with a mix of guilt and pride. He saved my life that day in the Delta, took shrapnel in his leg but kept going, carried me to safety. I wouldn't be here without him. The courtroom was silent, the locals' pity turning to awe. Clara's eyes met Jimmy's, a silent acknowledgement of their shared loss. Laura had been a friend to Jimmy's unit, a beacon in the chaos of war. Mr. Cole, Clara said, why did you file complaints against Mr. Reynolds? Jimmy's shoulders sagged. I didn't want to, Your Honor. Customers complained, said he scared them sitting in the alley. I told him he's harmless, but they pushed, threatened to stop coming. I left food for him, scraps mostly, so he'd have something. Never meant for this. Clara nodded, her mind racing. And did you give Mr. Reynolds permission to be near the diner? Jimmy hesitated, then nodded. Not in words, but yeah. I knew he was there. Knew he needed the warmth. I looked the other way. Elena seized the moment. Your Honor, this establishes implied consent. Mr. Reynolds wasn't trespassing. He was in a place he'd been tacitly allowed to stay, seeking survival, not harm. Torres stood, his voice less certain now. Your Honor, implied consent is a weak defense. The city's ordinances are clear, and Mr. Reynolds' actions disrupted business. Clara held up a hand, silencing him. I'll take that under advisement, Mr. Torres. The court will recess for 10 minutes. She rose, her movements swift, and retreated to her chambers, her heart pounding. She needed time to process, to confirm what she already suspected, that Sam Reynolds was the man who'd saved her sister, the man she'd spent years searching for. In the courtroom, Sam sat quietly, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the floor. Elena leaned close, her voice low. You did good, Sam. We're going to get through this. Sam nodded, but his expression was distant. Don't know why you're doing this, ma'am. I'm just an old man, not worth the trouble. Elena's eyes softened. You're worth more than you know, Sam. Trust me. Outside, the Reading sky was gray, a light drizzle falling over the orchards that lined the town's edges. Inside, the courtroom waited, a powder keg of truth ready to ignite. The Reading courthouse was silent during the recess, the air heavy with anticipation. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting stark shadows across the worn benches where a handful of locals and court staff waited, their whispers a low hum. Samuel Sam Reynolds sat at the defense table, his weathered hands clasped tightly, his faded blue eyes fixed on the floor. The cuffs were off now, but the weight of the IATSA charges, loitering, public disturbance, resisting arrest, pressed against him like a physical burden. Beside him, Elena Vasquez, his unexpected public defender, reviewed her notes, her sharp eyes scanning the military records she'd pulled from the Veterans Advocacy Network. She glanced at Sam, offering a reassuring nod, but his expression remained distant, as if he couldn't quite believe someone was fighting for him. In her chambers, Judge Clara Bennett stood by the window, the gray drizzle outside blurring the view of Reading's orchards. Her hands trembled as she clutched Laura's letter, the words written 55 years ago burning into her mind. Sergeant Reynolds saved us, Laura had written. He carried Private Cole through gunfire, went back for others, even with shrapnel in his leg. I've never seen courage like that. Clara's heart raced, the past colliding with the present in a way she hadn't prepared for. Sam Reynolds, The homeless veteran in her courtroom was the man who'd given her family a few more months with Laura before a mine in the Mekong Delta stole her forever. Clara's duty as a judge demanded impartiality, but her humanity demanded something else. A chance to repay a debt she'd carried for decades. She set the letter down, her fingers brushing the photograph of her and Laura, taken just before Laura's deployment. Laura's smile, bright and fearless, was a reminder of the sister who'd inspired Clara's path to law, her commitment to justice shaped by the stories of soldiers like Sam. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't let emotion cloud her judgment, but she couldn't ignore the truth either. Sam's service, his sacrifice, was relevant, not just to her, but to the case. She needed to hear more, to confirm what her heart already knew. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Tim, her clerk, peered in. "Judge Bennett, the recess is over, they're ready." Clara nodded, slipping the letter and photograph back into the wooden box. "Thank you, Tim. I'm coming." She adjusted her robe, her face settling into its familiar mask of authority, but beneath it, a storm of questions raged. She returned to the courtroom, her steps measured, her presence commanding silence as she took her seat. "The court is back in session," the bailiff announced. "Case 23C, City of Reading versus Samuel Reynolds." Clara's eyes swept the room, lingering briefly on Sam, whose posture remained slumped, as if braced for the worst. Elena stood, her briefcase open, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, we were discussing Mr. Reynolds' military service and the testimony of Mr. James Cole, owner of the Starlight Diner. We'd like to continue with Mr. Cole's testimony to establish the context of Mr. Reynolds' presence at the diner." Prosecutor Michael Torres shifted in his seat, his polished exterior betraying a flicker of unease. He'd expected a routine case, a quick conviction for a repeat offender, but Elena's defense and Sam's military record were complicating things. "Your Honor," Torres said, standing, "I renew my objection. Mr. Reynolds' service, while commendable, does not negate the charges. He violated city ordinances, and the diner's complaints are well documented." Clara's gaze was sharp, her voice firm. "The court will determine relevance, Mr. Torres. Mr. Cole's testimony may clarify the circumstances of the alleged violations. Ms. Vasquez, proceed." Elena nodded, turning to Jimmy Cole, who sat in the witness stand, his hands clasped tightly, his face a mix of guilt and resolve. Jimmy was a broad-shouldered man in his late 60s, his hair graying at the temples, his eyes carrying the weight of a shared past with Sam. "Mr. Cole," Elena began, "you've known Mr. Reynolds for many years, correct?" Jimmy nodded, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Yes, ma'am. Since 1970 in Vietnam. We served together, 1st Infantry Division, Mekong Delta. Sam was my sergeant." The gallery murmured, locals exchanging glances. Sam's presence behind the Starlight Diner was a familiar annoyance, but few had known he was a veteran, let alone one with a history like this. Elena pressed on. "Can you describe what happened on April 17, 1970, during the ambush you mentioned earlier?" Jimmy's eyes drifted to Sam, a silent apology passing between them. "It was bad," he said, his voice low. "We were on patrol near the river, escorting a supply convoy. Viet Cong hit us with everything, mortars, AKs, the works. Our medic went down first, then me, took a round in the shoulder. I thought I was done for, lying there in the mud, bullets kicking up dirt around me." He paused, swallowing hard. "Sam. He came for me, ran through gunfire, shrapnel tearing up his leg, and dragged me to cover behind a burned-out Jeep. He didn't stop there, went back for the others one by one, till the choppers came. Saved 6 of us that day, including Captain Bennett, the nurse who patched us up." Clara's hand tightened around her pen, her sister's name a jolt to her heart. She kept her face composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion. The gallery was silent, the weight of Jimmy's words sinking in. A few veterans in the back, identifiable by their VFW caps, leaned forward, their faces a mix of pride and sorrow. Elena nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "And how has your relationship with Mr. Reynolds continued since Vietnam?" Jimmy's shoulders sagged, guilt creeping into his voice. After the war, we lost touch for a while. I came back to Reading, took over the diner from my dad. Sam, he had a harder time. I didn't know he was in town till a few years ago when I saw him near the alley looking rough. I recognized him right away, even with the years between us. Did you ever ask him to leave the diner's premises? Elena asked. Jimmy shook his head. Not really. I knew he was staying warm by the vent. Winters here get brutal, and the shelter's always full. I left food for him, scraps mostly, sometimes a sandwich. Didn't want him going hungry. Elena seized the point. So you gave Mr. Reynolds implied permission to be there, correct? Yeah, Jimmy said, his voice firm now. I never told him to stay, but I never told him to go either. He wasn't hurting nobody. Customers complained, said he looked scary, but that's on them, not Sam. Elena turned to Clara. Your Honor, this establishes that Mr. Reynolds had tacit consent to be near the diner, negating the loitering and trespassing charges. His presence was a matter of survival, not disruption. Torres stood, his tone less confident now. Your Honor, implied consent is not a legal defense. The city's ordinances are clear, and Mr. Reynolds' actions cause documented complaints. His military service, while heroic, doesn't exempt him from the law. Clara's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the room. The court will consider all factors, Mr. Torres, including the context of Mr. Reynolds' actions. Mr. Cole, you mentioned complaints. Can you clarify why you filed them? Jimmy's face reddened, his hands clenching. I didn't want to, Your Honor. Customers kept pushing, said they'd stop coming if I didn't do something. A few threatened to call the city themselves. I filed the complaints to keep the peace, but I regret it. Sam's no trouble. He's a hero, and I let him down. The courtroom stirred, a ripple of empathy passing through the gallery. Clara's gaze softened, but she kept her tone formal. Thank you, Mr. Cole. You may step down. Jimmy returned to his seat, his eyes meeting Sam's with a silent plea for forgiveness. Sam nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle it went unnoticed by most, but to Jimmy, it was a lifeline. Clara made a note, her mind racing. Jimmy's testimony confirmed Sam's heroism, but it also highlighted the town's failure to support him. She needed more. Needed to know how a man like Sam had fallen so far. Ms. Vasquez, Clara said, do you have further witnesses or evidence? Elena nodded, pulling a document from her file. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Mr. Reynolds' military record, including his Silver Star citation for the April 1970 ambush. It details his actions, saving 6 soldiers, sustaining injuries, and ensuring the survival of his unit. This context is critical to understanding his current circumstances. Clara accepted the document, her eyes scanning the faded text. The citation was brief but powerful. Sergeant Samuel Reynolds, under intense enemy fire, risked his life to rescue wounded comrades, demonstrating extraordinary courage and devotion to duty. Her throat tightened, Laura's letter echoing in her mind. She set the document down, her voice steady but strained. The court will review this. Mr. Reynolds, I have a question for you. Sam looked up, surprise flickering across his lined face. Yes, ma'am? Clara leaned forward, her tone measured but intense. During the ambush, you mentioned Captain Laura Bennett. Can you describe her role that day? Sam's eyes grew distant, the memories stirring like dust in an old room. She was a nurse, ma'am, with the 85th Evac Hospital. When the shooting started, she didn't stay back, ran to the wounded, patching us up right there in the mud. Bullets flying, mortars shaking the ground, but she kept working, got me bandaged up, kept Private Cole alive till the choppers came. Brave as any soldier I ever saw. Clara's breath hitched, her sister's courage painted in Sam's words. She nodded, her voice softer now. And after the ambush, did you see her again? Sam's face clouded, a shadow of guilt passing over him. Once, ma'am, a few weeks later, at a field hospital. She thanked me, said I'd saved her boys. Then, I heard about her convoy, the mine. Felt like I failed her, not getting her home. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Sam's words settling over the room like a fog. Clara's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away, her judicial mask intact. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The court will take a brief recess. 10 minutes." She rose swiftly, retreating to her chambers before anyone could see the crack in her composure. Inside, she sank into her chair, her hands covering her face. Sam's story confirmed it. He was Laura's sergeant, the man who'd given Clara's family a few more letters, a few more moments, before Laura's death. The guilt he carried, the belief he'd, failed her, mirrored Clara's own grief. She'd spent years searching for him, hoping to learn more about Laura's final days, only to find him now, broken by a system that had forgotten him. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Rachel, it's Clara Bennett. I need your help. There's a veteran in my courtroom, Samuel Reynolds, Vietnam, 1st Infantry. I think he's the one Laura wrote about. Can you check his record, see if there's anything more? Awards? Benefits, anything?" Colonel Rachel Nguyen, a retired Army officer and old family friend, responded with her usual briskness. "Clara, you sound shaken. Give me his service number and I'll dig into it. The VA's been reviewing old files under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. If he's who you think, there might be something." Clara read the number from Sam's file, her voice urgent. "Please, Rachel, hurry. I don't want to lose him again." Back in the courtroom, Sam sat quietly, his hands folded, his mind a tangle of memories. Elena leaned close, her voice low. "You're doing great, Sam. That testimony, Jimmy's, yours, it's changing things. People are listening." Sam shook his head, his voice barely audible. "Don't know why it matters now, ma'am. That was a lifetime ago. I'm nobody now." Elena's eyes hardened with determination. "You're not nobody, Sam. You're a hero, and we're going to make sure this town knows it." Across the room, Torres reviewed his notes, his confidence waning. He'd built his case on ordinance violations, but the emotional weight of Sam's story was shifting the room. The gallery, now nearly full as word spread through Reading, buzzed with quiet respect. Veterans in the back whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of pride and anger at how one of their own had been treated. Jimmy Cole sat near the front, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on Sam. He'd failed his friend, filing those complaints under pressure, but today he'd spoken the truth. He prayed it was enough. As the recess ended, Clara returned, her posture rigid, her face unreadable. She took her seat, her voice cutting through the tension. "The court is back in session. Ms. Vasquez, do you have further testimony?" Elena stood, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to submit additional evidence regarding Mr. Reynolds's post-service struggles, PTSD, untreated injuries, and delays in VA benefits that led to his current situation. This supports our argument for dismissal, as his actions were driven by necessity, not malice." Clara nodded, her eyes flicking to Sam. "Proceed, Ms. Vasquez. The court is listening." Outside, the drizzle had stopped, the Reading sky clearing, to reveal a pale winter sun. Inside, the courtroom brimmed with anticipation, the truth about Sam Reynolds poised to break free. The Reading courthouse hummed with a quiet intensity, the air thick with expectation as the late winter sun filtered through the high windows, casting pale light across the worn benches. The gallery, now nearly full, buzzed with hushed conversations, locals, veterans, and court staff drawn by whispers of Samuel "Sam" Reynolds's past. Sam sat at the defense table, his weathered army jacket hanging loosely on his gaunt frame, his faded blue eyes fixed on his clasped hands. The charges against him, loitering, public disturbance, resisting arrest, seemed trivial now, overshadowed by the emerging truth of his heroism. Beside him, Elena Vasquez, his public defender, adjusted her notes, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any shift in the mood. She sensed the tide turning, but the case was far from won. Judge Clara Bennett sat at the bench, her dark robe a symbol of authority, but beneath her composed exterior, a storm raged. Sam's testimony, confirmed by Jimmy Cole's account, had solidified her suspicion. He was the Sergeant Reynolds from her sister Laura's letters, the man who'd saved 6 soldiers, including Laura, in a 1970 ambush in the Mekong Delta. Clara's duty demanded impartiality, but her heart demanded justice, not just for the charges, but for a man the system had failed. She'd called Colonel Rachel Nguyen during the recess, hoping Rachel's access to military records could uncover more about Sam's service, perhaps even unclaimed honors or benefits. The clock was ticking, and Clara needed answers before the case concluded. "The court is back in session," the bailiff announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Case 23C, City of Reading versus Samuel Reynolds. Clara's eyes swept the room, lingering on Sam, whose slumped posture belied the pride in his earlier words. Elena stood, her voice clear and resolute. "Your Honor, we were presenting evidence of Mr. Reynolds's post-service struggles, PTSD, untreated injuries, and delays in VA benefits that led to his presence behind the Starlight Diner. These circumstances negate malicious intent, supporting our request for dismissal." Prosecutor Michael Torres rose, his polished suit a stark contrast to Sam's tattered jacket. His confidence had waned, but he pressed forward, his tone measured. "Your Honor, while Mr. Reynolds's challenges are unfortunate, they do not excuse violations of city ordinances. His repeated presence at the diner caused documented complaints, and his resistance to arrest posed a safety risk. We maintain our recommendation of a fine and a no trespass order." Clara's lips tightened, her mind flashing to the consequences of Torres's proposal. A no trespass order would bar Sam from Reading's only shelter, leaving him exposed to the bitter February cold. She nodded, her voice firm. "Noted, Mr. Torres. Ms. Vasquez, you mentioned additional evidence. Please proceed." Elena opened her briefcase, retrieving a thin folder. "Your Honor, we submit medical records from the VA, obtained this morning, detailing Mr. Reynolds's untreated PTSD and shrapnel-related injuries from Vietnam. These conditions, compounded by delays in benefits, led to his homelessness. He said he wasn't loitering for disruption but seeking warmth, a basic necessity." Clara accepted the folder, her eyes scanning the sparse bureaucratic language. "Severe PTSD, diagnosed 1973. Untreated due to patient noncompliance and systemic delays. Chronic pain from shrapnel wounds, left leg, mobility impaired." Her throat tightened, anger rising at the system's neglect. She set the folder down, her voice steady but laced with intensity. "Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. Mr. Reynolds, I have a follow-up question about the April 1970 ambush. You mentioned Captain Laura Bennett's role. Can you describe the aftermath, how your actions affected your unit?" Sam looked up, surprise flickering across his lined face. The question stirred memories he'd buried deep, but Clara's tone, firm yet empathetic, drew him out. "After the ambush, ma'am," he began, his voice rough but clear, "we got the wounded to the choppers. Captain Bennett, she worked fast, kept us alive. I took shrapnel, but it wasn't bad, not compared to the others. We held the line till help came, saved 6 men. But it didn't feel like enough. Lost 3 that day. And later, when I heard about Captain Bennett's convoy." His voice cracked, guilt shadowing his eyes. "Felt like I should have done more." The courtroom fell silent, Sam's words carrying the weight of decades unspoken. Clara's hands clenched beneath the bench, her sister's memory vivid, Laura's courage, her sacrifice, and now Sam's guilt for surviving when she didn't. She forced her voice to remain even. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Your actions saved lives, including those of Private Cole and Captain Bennett for a time. That matters." The gallery stirred, a few veterans nodding in quiet respect. Jimmy Cole, seated near the front, wiped his eyes, his earlier testimony still raw. Elena seized the moment, her voice rising. "Your Honor, Mr. Reynolds's actions in 1970 demonstrate his character, a man who risked everything for others. His current situation is a failure of support, not of intent. We ask the court to dismiss the charges and consider his service as mitigating context." Torres stood, his objection softer now, almost reluctant. "Your Honor, the city acknowledges Mr. Reynolds's service, but the law applies equally. His actions disrupted a business, and we must uphold ordinances to maintain order." Clara's gaze was sharp, but before she could respond, the courtroom doors swung open with a soft creak. A woman strode in, her presence commanding immediate attention. Colonel Rachel Nguyen, retired, wore civilian clothes, a tailored blazer and slacks, but her military bearing was unmistakable. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the room. Behind her, a young Army C. Corporal followed, carrying a polished wooden case, its purpose unclear but ominous. Clara's pulse quickened, recognizing Rachel instantly. She'd hoped for a call, not an appearance, but Rachel's entrance signaled something significant. "Your Honor," Rachel said, her voice clear and authoritative. "Colonel Rachel Nguyen, United States Army, retired. I request permission to address the court regarding Mr. Samuel Reynolds." The gallery buzzed, heads turning. Torres's brow furrowed, his composure faltering. Elena glanced at Sam, who looked bewildered, his hands trembling slightly. Clara raised a hand, silencing the room. "This is highly irregular, Colonel Nguyen. Please state your purpose." Rachel stepped forward, her posture rigid. "I'm here on behalf of the Army's Veterans Reconsideration Initiative, Your Honor. New information regarding Mr. Reynolds' service in Vietnam has come to light, warranting immediate action. I have documentation and a formal commendation to present." Clara's heart raced, her judicial mask slipping for a moment. "The court will hear you, Colonel. Please proceed." Rachel nodded, her voice carrying the weight of command. Staff Sergeant Samuel Reynolds, 1st Infantry Division, served with distinction in Vietnam from 1968 to 1972. On April 17, 1970, during an ambush in the Mekong Delta, he saved 6 soldiers, including Private James Cole and Captain Laura Bennett, under intense enemy fire. His actions disrupted a Viet Cong assault, protecting a supply convoy and preventing further casualties. The courtroom was still, Rachel's words painting a vivid picture. Sam's head bowed, his shoulders shaking as memories flooded back. Rachel continued, her tone unwavering. "Sergeant Reynolds was awarded a Silver Star for his actions, but recent declassification of mission details has revealed the full scope of his heroism. His efforts not only saved his unit, but disrupted an enemy operation that could have targeted additional convoys." She gestured to the corporal, who opened the wooden case, revealing a medal nestled in blue velvet. "By order of the Secretary of the Army," Rachel announced, "Sergeant Samuel Reynolds' Silver Star has been upgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest honor for valor, in recognition of his extraordinary bravery, on April 17, 1970. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, the gallery erupting in murmurs. The Distinguished Service Cross was rare, a testament to courage beyond duty. Sam's eyes widened, disbelief etched across his face. "There's gotta be a mistake," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I just did my job." Rachel's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "No mistake, Sergeant, this is long overdue. Your actions saved lives and altered the course of that engagement. The Army has been searching for you to correct this oversight." Clara's hands trembled, her judicial composure fraying. Laura's letters had described Sam's courage, but to hear it confirmed, to see the medal, was overwhelming. She glanced at Sam, whose face was a mix of shock and humility, and felt a surge of gratitude and conflict. As a judge, she should recuse herself. Her personal connection to Laura compromised her impartiality. But as Laura's sister, she couldn't walk away, not when Sam's dignity hung in the balance. "Colonel Nguyen," Clara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Does this recognition include any updates to Mr. Reynolds' veterans' benefits?" Rachel nodded, producing a folder. "Yes, Your Honor. The VA has reassessed Mr. Reynolds' disability rating, 100% service-connected, retroactive to his 1973 discharge. He's entitled to full back pay, medical coverage, housing assistance, and educational benefits. My office will ensure these are processed immediately." The gallery stirred again, veterans in the back standing, their faces a mix of pride and anger at the years Sam had been neglected. Jimmy Cole's eyes glistened, his hands clenched as he watched his friend finally recognized. Elena's face, lit with quiet triumph, her faith in Sam vindicated. Torres stood, his voice hesitant. Your Honor, while this is extraordinary, the charges remain. Mr. Reynolds' service doesn't negate the need for accountability. Clara's gaze was piercing, her patience thinning. The court will determine accountability, Mr. Torres. Colonel Nguyen, thank you for your testimony. Please remain available for further questions. She turned to the bailiff. This court will recess for 15 minutes. Mr. Reynolds, please stay. She rose, retreating to her chambers, her heart pounding. Inside, she sank into her chair, pressing her hands to her face. The Distinguished Service Cross, the benefits, the confirmation of Sam's heroism. It was more than she'd hoped, but it complicated her role. She opened Laura's letter again, rereading the words. Sergeant Reynolds is the kind of man you'd want beside you in hell. He gave us hope when we had none. Clara's eyes filled with tears, the weight of her sister's admiration mingling with her own gratitude. A knock interrupted her. Rachel stepped in, her face concerned. Clara, you okay? This is big, but you look like you're carrying the world. Clara managed a faint smile, wiping her eyes. It's him, Rachel. Laura's sergeant. I've been searching for him since she died, and now he's in my courtroom, charged with sleeping in an alley. How did we let this happen? Rachel's expression hardened, a soldier's resolve. The system fails too many, Clara. PTSD, red tape, indifference. Sam got caught in it. But we're fixing it now. His benefits, the medal, they're a start. Clara nodded, her voice firm. I should recuse myself. Laura's connection, it's a conflict. But I can't let him disappear again, Rachel. Not after everything. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. You're a judge, but you're human. Do what's right, not just what's legal. Sam deserves that. Clara took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. I will, but I need to tread carefully. The town's watching, and Torres won't back down easily. Back in the courtroom, Sam sat quietly, the wooden case with the medal resting on the table before him. He hadn't touched it, as if afraid it would vanish. Elena leaned close, her voice low. This changes everything, Sam. The medal, the benefits. You're not alone anymore. Sam's eyes were distant, his voice soft. Don't feel real, ma'am. Been so long since anyone cared. Why now? Elena's gaze was steady. Because you matter, Sam. Always have. We're just catching up. The gallery buzzed, veterans whispering about the Distinguished Service Cross, locals reevaluating the man they'd dismissed. Jimmy Cole sat near the front, his face a mix of relief and guilt. He'd spoken the truth, but the complaints he'd filed still gnawed at him, a betrayal of the man who'd saved his life. As the recess ended, Clara returned, her posture flawless, her face unreadable. She took her seat, her voice cutting through the tension. The court is back in session. Ms. Vasquez, do you have further arguments? Elena stood, her voice ringing with conviction. Your Honor, in light of Colonel Nguyen's testimony and Mr. Reynolds' service record, we reiterate our request for dismissal. His actions were driven by survival, not malice, and his implied consent to be at the diner negates the charges. We also request the court consider his restored benefits as a path to stability, rendering punitive measures unnecessary. Clara nodded, her eyes flicking to Sam, then to the gallery, where veterans stood in silent solidarity. She knew the next moments would define not just the case, but her own reckoning with Laura's legacy. The Reading courthouse was a crucible of silence, the weight of the moment pressing against every surface. The worn benches, the scuffed linoleum, the high windows where late winter light spilled in, soft and pale. The gallery, packed with locals, veterans, and court staff, held its collective breath, eyes fixed on the bench where Judge Clara Bennett sat. Her dark robe was a mantle of authority, but beneath it, her heart raced, torn between duty and a debt that spanned decades. Samuel Sam Reynolds, the weathered veteran at the defense table, was no longer just a defendant charged with loitering, public disturbance, and resisting arrest. He was the man who'd saved her sister, Captain Laura Bennett, in a 1970 ambush in the Mekong Delta, a hero whose Distinguished Service Cross now lay in a polished wooden case before him. Sam sat quietly, his gaunt frame swallowed by his tattered army jacket, his faded blue eyes fixed on the metal he hadn't dared touch. The revelation of his upgraded award, delivered by Colonel Rachel Nguyen, had stunned the courtroom, shifting the narrative from petty violations to profound sacrifice. Beside him, Elena Vasquez, his public defender, stood poised, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of resistance. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Michael Torres adjusted his notes, his polished exterior betraying a flicker of unease. The case, once a routine conviction, had become a reckoning. For Sam, for Clara, for the town of Reading. Clara's hands rested on the bench, steady despite the turmoil within. Sam's testimony, Jimmy Cole's emotional account, and Rachel's confirmation of the Distinguished Service Cross had unraveled her judicial impartiality. Laura's letters, tucked away in her chambers, echoed in her mind. Sergeant Reynolds gave us hope when we had none. Clara knew she should recuse herself. Her personal connection to Laura was a clear conflict, but the thought of abandoning Sam, of letting him slip back into obscurity, was unbearable. She'd searched for him for years, hoping to thank the man who'd given her family a few more moments with Laura. Now he sat in her courtroom, broken by a system that had forgotten him, and she had the power to change that. "The court is back in session," the bailiff announced, his voice a sharp note in the hushed room. "Case 23C, City of Reading versus Samuel Reynolds." Clara's gaze swept the gallery, noting the veterans in their VFW caps, their faces a mix of pride and anger, and the locals, their earlier pity replaced by quiet awe. Jimmy Cole sat near the front, his hands clasped, his eyes glistening with hope for his old friend. Colonel Rachel Nguyen stood at the back, her military bearing a silent testament to Sam's worth. Clara turned to Elena, her voice formal but strained. "Ms. Vasquez, you've requested dismissal of the charges. Do you have any final arguments?" Elena rose, her voice ringing with conviction. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mr. Reynolds had implied consent to be near the Starlight Diner, as confirmed by Mr. Cole's testimony. His presence was driven by survival, not malice, a direct result of untreated PTSD, physical injuries, and systemic failures in veteran care. His Distinguished Service Cross and restored VA benefits demonstrate his character and the path forward. Punitive measures serve no purpose here. Mr. Reynolds deserves compassion, not condemnation." Clara nodded, her eyes flicking to Sam, whose head remained bowed, as if braced for judgment. She turned to Torres, her tone sharp. "Mr. Torres, your response?" Torres stood, his confidence eroded by the weight of the room. "Your Honor," he began, his voice softer now, "the city respects Mr. Reynolds' service and the new information presented. However, the charges stem from documented violations, 3 complaints from the Starlight Diner and resistance to arrest. While we sympathize with his circumstances, the law requires accountability. We stand by our recommendation of a $500 fine and a no trespass order for downtown Reading." A murmur rippled through the gallery, veterans shifting in their seats, their disapproval palpable. Clara's lips tightened, her mind racing. A no trespass order would exile Sam from the 4th Street shelter, the church meals, the fragile network that kept him alive. She glanced at Sam, his weathered face etched with resignation, and felt a surge of resolve. This was more than a case. It was a chance to right a wrong, to honor Laura's memory and Sam's sacrifice. "Mr. Reynolds," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension, "would you like to speak before I rule?" Sam looked up, surprise flickering across his lined face. He hesitated, his hands trembling as he gripped the table for support. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough but clear, "I ain't got much to say. I wasn't trying to cause trouble, just needed a place to stay warm. I don't know why all this is happening now, the medal, the benefits. Feels like a dream I don't deserve. But I'm grateful, more than I can say." The simplicity of his words struck the room like a bell silencing the murmurs. Clara's throat tightened, her sister's voice echoing in her mind. "He's the kind of man you'd be proud to know." She took a breath, her decision crystallizing. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Before I rule, I must address a personal matter, as it bears on this case." The gallery leaned forward, a collective intake of breath. Elena's eyes widened, sensing a shift. Torres's brow furrowed, his notes forgotten. Clara set her glasses aside, a rare gesture that stripped away the judicial barrier. 25 years ago, she began, her voice clear but trembling. "My sister, Captain Laura Bennett, served as a nurse in Vietnam. She wrote home about an ambush in the Mekong Delta, April 17, 1970, where a Sergeant Samuel Reynolds saved her unit, 6 soldiers including Private James Cole, under enemy fire." Gasps echoed through the courtroom, the gallery stirring with shock. Sam's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Clara's, recognition dawning. "Your sister?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Clara nodded, her eyes glistening but her voice steady. "Laura wrote that you ran through gunfire, carried wounded men to safety, and held the line until help came. She called you the bravest man she'd ever seen. Because of you, we had a few more months with her, letters, calls, moments we cherished, before she was killed by a mine in July 1971. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Clara's words settling like a fog. Jimmy Cole's hands covered his face, tears slipping through his fingers. Veterans in the gallery stood, their postures rigid with respect. Elena's eyes softened, her hand resting lightly on Sam's arm. Torres sat frozen, his objection forgotten. "I tried to find you after Laura's death," Clara continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I wanted to thank you, to hear more about her final days, but the Army said you'd been discharged, lost to PTSD and injuries. For years I thought you were gone, until today when you walked into my courtroom." She paused, her gaze locked on Sam's. "This creates a conflict of interest. I should recuse myself, but I won't. Not when I can ensure you're seen, truly seen, for the hero you are." Sam's eyes filled with tears, his composure cracking. I didn't know, ma'am," he said, his voice thick. "Captain Bennett. She was special. I'm sorry I couldn't save her." Clara shook her head, a tear escaping. "You gave her time, Sam. You gave us time. That's more than enough." The gallery was still, the air electric with emotion. Clara took a breath, her judicial mask returning, though her hands trembled. "In light of the evidence, Mr. Cole's testimony, Colonel Nguyen's confirmation, and Mr. Reynolds' service record, this court finds no basis for the charges. The loitering and disturbance claims are negated by implied consent, and the resistance charge lacks evidence of intent. All charges against Staff Sergeant Samuel Reynolds are hereby dismissed." She brought down the gavel with force, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The gallery erupted, veterans cheering, locals clapping, their earlier indifference replaced by reverence. Sam sat stunned, his hands shaking as Elena gripped his shoulder, her smile triumphant. Torres sank into his seat, his face a mix of defeat and respect. Clara wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice softer now, but carrying the weight of her office. "Mr. Reynolds, this court acknowledges your Distinguished Service Cross and the sacrifices you've made. The VA's reassessment of your benefits, full disability, back pay, housing, and medical care, is a step toward justice. Ms. Vasquez, I trust your firm will ensure these are processed without delay." Elena nodded, her voice firm. "Absolutely, Your Honor. We'll handle every detail." Clara turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping the veterans, the locals, Jimmy Cole. "This case is a reminder that our veterans deserve more than medals. They deserve support, dignity, a place to call home. Reading can do better, and I believe it will." The gallery stood, a spontaneous ovation led by the veterans, their salutes crisp and heartfelt. Sam rose slowly, his joints aching but his posture straighter, as if the weight of decades was lifting. He met Clara's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Laura's memory, their shared loss, a debt repaid. Torres approached the defense table, his voice low. Mr. Reynolds, I had no idea. I'm sorry for how this was handled. Your service, it's an honor to witness. Sam nodded, his voice soft. No hard feelings, son. You were doing your job. Jimmy Cole pushed through the crowd, his eyes red. Sam, he said, his voice breaking, I'm so damn sorry for those complaints. I should have fought harder for you. Sam clasped his hand, a faint smile breaking through. You fought today, Jimmy. That's enough. Colonel. Rachel Nguyen approached, the wooden case in her hands. Sergeant Reynolds, she said, her tone warm but formal. This belongs to you. She opened the case, the Distinguished Service Cross gleaming against the velvet. Wear it with pride. Sam's fingers brushed the metal, his voice barely audible. Don't know if I can, ma'am. Feels like it belongs to the others. Cole, Captain Bennett, the ones we lost. Rachel's eyes softened. It belongs to you, Sam. They'd want you to have it. Clara stepped down from the bench, a rare breach of protocol, and approached Sam. The courtroom quieted, sensing the significance. Sam, she said, her voice steady but filled with meaning. Laura wrote that you said, no soldier gets left behind. Today we keep that promise to you. Sam's tears fell freely now, his voice a whisper. Someone remembered my name. After all this time, someone remembered. The gallery surged forward, veterans shaking Sam's hand, locals offering words of gratitude. Clara returned to her chambers, her heart full but heavy. She opened Laura's letter one last time, reading the final line. If I don't make it home, tell the world about men like Sergeant Reynolds. Clara smiled through her tears, knowing she'd done just that. Outside, the Reading sky was clear, the winter sun warming the orchards that stretched beyond the town. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with a new energy, a community awakened to the hero in its midst. The Reading sun rose gently over the orchards, its golden light filtering through the bare branches of late winter, casting long shadows across the quiet town. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and blooming almond trees, a promise of spring just beyond the horizon. At the edge of town, in a modest apartment complex built for veterans, Samuel Sam Reynolds stood before a small mirror, adjusting the collar of a new shirt. The fabric felt foreign against his skin, clean and pressed, a far cry from the tattered army jacket he'd worn for years. At 67, his face was still lined with the scars of war and hardship, but his faded blue eyes held a new clarity, a quiet strength that had been buried for decades. 3 weeks had passed since the courtroom drama that changed everything. The charges, loitering, public disturbance, resisting arrest, were dismissed, replaced by a Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor, awarded for his heroism in a 1970 ambush in the Mekong Delta. The VA had reinstated his benefits, full disability, back pay, housing, medical care, correcting years of neglect. Sam was no longer the homeless veteran lingering behind the Starlight Diner, a figure of pity or annoyance. He was Staff Sergeant Samuel Reynolds, a hero Reading was learning to honor. The apartment was simple, its walls bare except for a single frame on the living room table. Inside, the Distinguished Service Cross gleamed beside his long-lost Purple Heart and Bronze Star, medals Elena Vasquez's firm had recovered from a storage locker sold off years ago. Sam's fingers brushed the frame, a hesitant gesture as if he still couldn't believe it was real. The medals belonged to the man he'd been, a soldier who'd saved 6 lives, including Private James Cole and Captain Laura Bennett, under enemy fire. That man had been lost to PTSD, injuries, and a system that failed him. But now he was being found again, one step at a time. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sam opened it to find Judge Clara Bennett, not in her judicial robes, but in a simple coat, holding a small wooden box. Her hazel eyes, sharp but warm, met his with a smile. "Good morning, Sam," she said, her voice soft. "May I come in?" "Just Sam's fine, ma'am," he said, a humble smile breaking through. "And you're always welcome." "Then it's just Clara," she replied, stepping inside. They sat across from each other in the modest living room, the quiet of their shared past filling the space. Clara set the box on the table, her fingers lingering on its polished surface. "I brought something," she said, opening it to reveal a bundle of letters, their edges worn from years of handling. "They're from Laura. She wrote us every week from Vietnam. This one mentions you." Sam's hands trembled as he took the letter she offered, its paper brittle but intact. Laura's handwriting was clear, sharp, just as he remembered her, steady under pressure, even in the chaos of war. He read aloud, his voice rough but steady. "Dear Clara, don't worry about the news. I'm safe, thanks to Sergeant Reynolds. Yesterday our unit was ambushed in the Delta. He moved through gunfire like it didn't exist, carried Private Cole to cover, then went back for others. He refused to leave anyone behind, said no soldier gets left behind, not on his watch." Sam's voice cracked, his eyes glistening. "She was a good officer," he said softly. "Young but cared about her people." "That's rare." Clara nodded, her own eyes wet. "She mentioned you often, Sam. Said you were the soldier she looked up to, the one who gave her hope in the darkest moments." She hesitated, then added, "After she died, I went to law school, started the Veterans Court program, pushed for housing initiatives. All because of what she wrote about men like you, how the system forgets its own." Sam shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the letter. "I'm no hero, Clara, just did what needed doing." "That's what heroes always say," she replied, a quiet smile breaking through. "But you gave us time with her, Sam. That's everything." They sat in silence, two lives woven together by service and sorrow. Outside, a light snow began to fall, soft and steady, blanketing Redding in a quiet hush. Clara spoke again, her voice gentle. "There's one more thing you should know. The day Laura died, she was on a mission to deliver medical supplies to a village, one she volunteered for. Her last letter said she wanted to live up to the example you set. Courage, selflessness, never leaving anyone behind." Sam's breath caught, the words hitting harder than any battlefield wound. For years, he'd carried guilt, wondering if saving Laura had only delayed her death if his actions had been futile. "She didn't die because of you," Clara said, reading his thoughts. "She lived the way she did because of you." The weight of her words settled over him, a balm for wounds he'd carried too long. "For years," he said, his voice barely audible. "Sleeping on the streets, I thought no one remembered, like it didn't matter anymore." Clara reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "It mattered, Sam. To Laura, to Jimmy, to every soldier you saved, and to me." As she stood to leave, she placed the box of letters beside the metal frame. "Keep these," she said. "They're as much yours as they are mine." Sam nodded, his posture straighter, a quiet strength radiating from within. "Someone remembered my name," he said softly. "After all this time, someone remembered." Clara smiled, her heart full. "And we'll keep remembering, Sam. Always." The months that followed transformed Redding in ways no one could have predicted. Sam's story, spread through local papers and whispered in diners, became a rallying cry. The town, once indifferent to the veteran in its shadows, awoke to its responsibility. Jimmy Cole, guilt-ridden for his complaints, offered Sam a part-time job at the Starlight Diner, not as a cook but as a greeter, his warm smile welcoming customers who now knew his name. The diner's walls, once bare, now displayed a framed article about Sam's Distinguished Service Cross, a quiet tribute to the man who'd saved its owner. Elena Vasquez's firm worked tirelessly, ensuring Sam's VA benefits were processed, without delay. The back pay, a substantial sum after decades of neglect, gave him stability, while the housing program provided a permanent home. Medical care addressed his chronic pain and PTSD, though Sam preferred talking with fellow veterans. At the local VFW to formal therapy, the group, led by a grizzled Marine named Hank, welcomed him like a brother, their meetings filled with stories of service and survival, laughter mingling with the weight of memory. Redding's Veterans Day event, held annually in November, took on new meaning that year. The town square, adorned with flags and wreaths, buzzed with anticipation as hundreds gathered, locals, veterans, even visitors from neighboring towns drawn by Sam's story. A small stage stood at the center, flanked by banners honoring Reddings. Fallen, Sam, dressed in a new suit, stood backstage, his hands fidgeting with the Distinguished Service Cross pinned to his chest. He'd resisted wearing it, insisting it belonged to his unit, but Clara and Jimmy had convinced him, their quiet insistence a reminder of his worth. Clara, serving as the event's keynote speaker, took the stage first, her presence commanding, despite her civilian attire. "Today," she began, her voice carrying over the crowd, "we honor those who served, those who sacrificed, and those we've too often forgotten." Staff Sergeant Samuel Reynolds reminds us that heroism doesn't end on the battlefield. It endures in the quiet moments, in the courage to keep going when the world turns away. The crowd applauded, their faces a mix of pride and reflection. Clara continued, her voice softening. "Sam saved my sister, Captain Laura Bennett, and 6 others in Vietnam. His story is a call to action, to support our veterans, to ensure no one is left behind. Redding is answering that call with a new shelter, named in Sam's honor, opening next spring." The announcement drew cheers, the crowd's energy infectious. Clara stepped aside, gesturing to Sam. "Please welcome staff. Sergeant Samuel Reynolds." Sam walked onto the stage, his steps hesitant, the weight of the crowd's gaze unfamiliar. He adjusted the microphone, his voice rough but steady. "I ain't much for speeches," he said, a faint smile breaking through. "Never thought I'd be here, standing in front of folks who know my name. All I did back in Nam was what any soldier would do, look out for my people. Captain Bennett, Private Cole, the others, they were the brave ones. I just carried them home." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, finding Clara, Jimmy, Elena, and Hank. "This town, you've given me more than I can repay. A home, a purpose, a chance to be somebody again. But there's others out there, veterans like me, who need that chance too. Don't forget them." That's all I got to say. The crowd rose, their applause thunderous, veterans saluting, locals wiping tears. Sam stepped back, his face flushed but his posture proud, the soldier he'd been shining through the years. Clara joined him, her hand on his shoulder, a silent promise kept. The Sam Reynolds Veterans Shelter opened the following spring, its ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by hundreds. The building, modest but sturdy, stood near the orchards, its walls adorned with plaques honoring Redding's veterans. Sam, now a quiet fixture in the community, cut the ribbon, his hands steady despite the crowd's cheers. He worked part-time at the shelter, greeting residents with the same warmth he brought to the Starlight Diner, his presence a reminder that dignity could be restored. Clara visited often, her role as a judge now intertwined with advocacy for veterans' rights. She and Sam met weekly, sharing coffee and stories of Laura, their bond a bridge between past and present. Jimmy, freed from guilt, hosted monthly veteran breakfasts at the diner, the tables filled with laughter and camaraderie. Elena, promoted for her work on Sam's case, expanded her firm's pro bono program, ensuring no veteran in Redding went unheard. One quiet afternoon, as summer bloomed over the orchards, Sam sat on his apartment's small balcony, Laura's letters beside him. The Distinguished Service Cross hung on the wall, no longer a burden but a testament to the lives he'd saved. He opened a letter, reading Laura's words. "Tell the world about men like Sergeant Reynolds." He smiled, knowing Clara had done just that. Outside, the Redding sky was clear, the orchards vibrant with green. Sam stood, his silhouette tall against the horizon, a man no longer in the shadows. His story, once forgotten, was now a legend in Redding, a reminder that some heroes save lives, then spend a lifetime waiting for someone to save theirs. But sometimes, dignity doesn't need glory. Sometimes, it just needs someone to remember a name.